Well, welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today is no exception. We have a great guest all the way from Ambergris Caye in Belize. Welcome to the show, Anna Kelly.
So good to be here. How wonderful to be in Ambergris Caye, some beautiful weather, recording a podcast.
That's right. We're right here on the beach at the beach club at Mahogany Bay Village, and we're hanging out and we're talking real estate, which is what we love to do. For the folks who haven't met you, maybe give a little bit of your backstory and how you got to this point in your journey.
Great. So long story short, Victor, I've been investing since 1998 in different niches within real estate. And in 2008, I got really serious about investing, where before I dabbled and flipped some properties and, bought speculatively, rehabbed some units. But in 2008, I really realized that real estate was going to be the path that I took forward. I started out in private banking, and so I understood the retail investment world really well, but I was blindsided by the Great Recession and the economic cycle changes that were happening there. And what I realized was that real estate was very resilient. It was basically a fundamental need, and people were still paying rent. So that took me on about a 10-year journey to develop wealth through multifamily real estate investing in my own portfolio, then moved to joint ventures, and since then I've done about $300 million in multifamily syndications, vacation rentals, etc.
I love that. There's no one prescribed pathway into this business. Everyone has their own journey, and I love what you've done, and we've known each other for a number of years and kind of watched each other from a distance. We've talked a number of times as well. Now, one of the things that you talked about this week when we were all together is this concept of, you learned something about risk, and we've had a number of conversations about risk management. Why don't we start there?
Sure. So one of the things we always have to think about as real estate investors is not just what's the upside, but what are the risks that are inherent in what we do, the risks to the income, the risks to the expenses, the risks to valuation, and things that can change what we think our properties are worth and the cash flow that we create. And so I've thought a lot about over time, what type of things impact my cash flow, right? We think of things in multifamily like vacancy rates and rental rates and whether there's a recession and people can't pay. Through COVID, we learned a new type of risk, and it was the first time I started thinking about legislative risk when we had tenants and contracts that said tenants had to pay, and suddenly during a pandemic, those contracts were ripped up by the local and federal governments, and tenants didn't have to pay. Well, suddenly you have a huge hit to your cash flow that you might not have thought about before. And it also, if you can't keep your NOI up, can really impact your values of your properties. And so legislative risk was a new kind of risk that really came to my mind during the pandemic, on top of all the other types of risks that we have that we talk about today, like interest rate risk, political risks in certain environments, risks of these other things that have to do with the economics of the tenant.
There's a perception that this might be maybe red states versus blue states. Some places are going to be more landlord-friendly, some are going to be more tenant-friendly, but it didn't really play out that way. It was actually almost on a county-by-county basis, town-by-town basis.
Absolutely. And I definitely saw that. At the time of the pandemic, we had properties in Pennsylvania, in Atlanta, and in Houston, Texas. And the way that the local municipalities dealt with those eviction moratoriums and dealt with tenants who maybe could pay but chose not to versus tenants who really couldn't it was like night and day, depending on where we were located. And so I very much realized that it didn't necessarily matter where the national politics were and even the state politics, but it really comes down to who are the judges in that municipality or county. Are they landlord friendly? Are they tenant friendly? That made a big difference in our outcomes.
In some communities, the pandemic's been declared over by the World Health Organization. There are still places where tenants don't necessarily have to pay their rent.
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. We are in the Hershey, Pennsylvania area, and we have two different municipalities. One of them is very landlord friendly. And so if a tenant, smokes pot and they're not supposed to and they haven't paid a month rent, they're out. The other one, they might not have paid for 3 months, but they say that they're trying. They give them a little more time. They delay the eviction. They delay even the lockouts, and they're very, very tenant friendly still. In Houston, Texas, where it's a very large city and certain suburbs are very conservative, we're having a much harder time still getting people out because the court systems are so backed up. And even though Texas itself is very landlord friendly, Houston City is not.
Fascinating. So as an investor, environments change. You pick a market based on what you think are the right demographics in terms of employment, in terms of population growth, all of these things. As you're going forward, how do you even perform due diligence on this aspect?
Well, one of the things that I do, I'm very cognizant now, especially post-COVID, what is the political environment there? And regardless of where you are politically, personally, and what you think about, whether you're more far right or far left, when you invest, you always have to look at what is the local, the county, and the state political environment when it comes to fiscal issues and when it comes to issues of helping those that can't help themselves. And right now with affordable housing crisis and with tenants who are still recovering from COVID, a lot of municipalities are just pro-tenant. And so I look at those things, and for the most part I invest in areas that are locally conservative, low taxation mindset, landlord friendly, and have great schools and low crime. And when an area is growing, it's business friendly, has low crime and low taxes and good schools, typically they are landlord friendly. So that's my first check before I ever underwrite a deal is, do they check those boxes? And if they do, I'll underwrite. If they don't, I don't go there, because it's just going to get worse and worse as time goes on, as the affordability crisis increases. If we have any other kind of red herring event like another pandemic, that's going to be more likely for that to go against what I want to do with my business plan rather than for me.
The terms landlord friendly, tenant friendly are a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, imagine for a moment that you owned a restaurant and someone came in and they didn't pay, and the law says, well, they get their meal for free, but not only that, it says they get to stay and you have to continue feeding them in perpetuity. I mean, it sounds kind of almost ridiculous to say that, but that is exactly the scenario that we're talking about when it comes to housing.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we have to realize is where before I could more easily do that kind of quick demographic search and look at the rules, I also look at what things are on the books coming up for debate in the House and the Congress of that area, like legislation that may impact tenants and may impact landlords. So I look at that. But what I realized with COVID, and again, to your point, that it didn't matter which political party you were in, is that nationally there's more and more of a push to help those with affordability issues. And because of housing being unaffordable, there are more and more bills being introduced to the national Congress to really say, hey, do we need to put more protection in for tenants rather than landlords? And so we have to realize the local can help us to a point, but there are national shifts on the horizon. And I definitely look at that legislative risk and try to underwrite. For example, when I'm underwriting a deal, I'm not going to assume that my rents are going to be able to go up 5% a year for the next 5 years, because what if they put in national rent controls at 3%? I want to kind of stress test my deals and say, if I could only raise rent 3%, would I still be able to perform on this deal?
I love it. Well, Anna, if folks want to connect, if they want to learn more, what's the best way?
Great. You can find me on my website at reimom.com for coaching and consulting, or greaterpurposecapital.com. And you can find me on social media at Anna Kelly, REI Mom.
Fabulous. Well, Anna, great to connect, great to catch up. And for the listeners at home, definitely reach out to Anna at reimom.com. And in the meantime, have an awesome rest of your weekend. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.